ICD-10 JJ-10B Guidelines, page 49 or 049, part 1.
Section 1. Conventions, General Coding Guidelines, and Chapter-Specific Guidelines.
This is like a hierarchy of the rules. The first rule is the conventions. That will be like the Supreme Court in the US. What the conventions say comes first. Then we have the General Coding Guidelines. That will be like the state Supreme Court, right? Within the state, these are the guidelines. And then the chapter-specific guidelines, that will be like a local courts, right? So the hierarchy goes from conventions down, okay? So the conventions, general guidelines and chapter-specific guidelines are applicable to all healthcare settings unless otherwise indicated.
The conventions and instructions of the classification takes precedence over guidelines.
Which means that you have to first consider the conventions and instructions and then the guidelines, okay? Let's give you an example of a convention here, right? Coding convention dashes, which is this line here in the alphabetic index, at the end of a code indicates an incomplete code. For instance, if you go to fracture, pathological, for ankle, you find M84.47 and it's a dash, right? If you go to the tabular, there's different values for the dash. There's 1, 2, 3, and every value is a different condition. So you have to go to the tabular to find the value for the dash. The second convention here for a dash in the tabular list, a dash preceded by a decimal point, which means decimal point and then dash, indicates an incomplete code. For example, in J43 emphysema, in the exclusions, you find emphysematous obstructive bronchitis, and in parentheses there's a J44 point dash, which means that you have to go to J44 to find the value for the dash, okay? So that's a convention, and it takes precedence over guidelines. And that was a theory for today, and now we're going to do a problem. So ready, set, go. All right, ICD-10 JJ-10A, page 363, problem 8, and this is a level 2 exercise. It reads like this.
Esophageal web with esophageal spasm and reflux esophagitis.
Right. This is esophageal web with esophageal spasm and reflux esophagitis. Okay, so we're going to count to 3, so you can pause the video, then give us the ICD-10 code for these diagnoses. 1, 2, 3. Okay, the answer is Q39.4, K22.4, and K21.0. You got that? Congratulations. If you didn't get it, let's give you a couple of tips. Okay, tips 1. Tip 1. The first tip is
level 2 difficulty, 3 codes.
We categorize this as a level 2 because you have to find 3 codes. There's not just one code that covers all the 3 conditions. Okay, so let's give them hints of how to do it with the tip number 2.
First, start with web.
First, for the first code, start with web. For the second code,
continue with spasm.
Continue with spasm for the second code. They both go next to
esophagus.
After you start with the web of spasm, then you go to esophagus. Now the third code
is reflux and esophageal.
You start with reflux and then go to esophageal, right? Okay, that's how you find the 3 codes. And here's a little just picture of what esophageal webs are, so you can have a little more detail. Okay, so the answer for the problem is Q39.4, K22.4, and K21.0. Now we're going to count to 3 to pause the video so you can give us the path, how we got to the answer, okay? So 1, 2, 3. Okay, this is that whole summary of the problem. The problem is esophageal web with esophageal spasm and reflux esophagitis. There are 3 codes. The code number 1 through the index is found like this.
First you go to index. Then you go to web.
Okay.
Then you go to esophagus.
Esophagus.
Then you get this code, Q39.4.
That's the code for esophageal web, okay? Now, you after you get the Q39.4, you have to check that in the tabular. So the code 1 through the tabular is found like this.
First you go to tabular. Then if you first start with the three characters.
Which
are Q39.
And what is that? Congenital malformations
of esophagus,
right? Which is more or less what webs are. And so let's go.
Q39.4,
which is
esophageal web.
Esophageal web, and there's an equal sign, and that's the first code. Okay, code number 2. The code number 3 to the index is found like this.
First you go to index. Then you go to spasm. Then you go to esophagus.
And you get
K22.4.
This is for this part, right? Esophageal spasm, okay? So now you're going to go to the tabular to check that code. So the code number 2 through the tabular is found like this.
First you go to tabular. Then you go to the first three characters.
You start with K22.
Yes.
What's that?
Other diseases of esophagus.
Okay, then you go to
K22.4, spasm of esophagus.
And there's an equal sign at the end, which means that you double check that code. Okay, now for the code number 3, or for reflux esophagitis, right?
Yes.
Okay, so the code number 3 to the index is found like this.
First you go to index. Then you go to reflux. Then you go to pharyngeal. Esophageal.
Esophageal, the esophagus with
esophagitis.
And you get
K21.0.
And then you check that in the tabular. So the code 3 to the tabular is found like this.
First you go to tabular. Then you go to K21.
And you start with
gastroesophageal reflux disease.
Okay, and the 0 would be
K21.0 is reflux esophagitis,
which is exactly what we need. And then there's the equal sign, so that's why the answer is Q39.4, K22.4, and K21.0. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to visit our website. And also
you can subscribe to us in YouTube by clicking here for our new medical coding videos.
Okay, and what did you get?
You get up to 3 videos every day that we make. ICD-10s, CPTs, all that is needed to pass the medical coding certification exams.
Okay, so don't forget to visit our website and then subscribe to our videos. Thank you.
Goodbye.